Most leaders treat profit as the primary goal of a business, but my guest today argues that profit is actually just the applause that you receive for creating a workplace where people truly flourish. For 25 years, he served as chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company, where he led a cultural transformation that saw the company's market cap grow from 300 million to nearly 3.5 billion with a B. But the real metric isn't what he tracks on the balance sheet. It's the fact that during a global pandemic, for instance, 97% of the employees reported feeling safe and excited about their future. So joining me today on the Steward Chair is Garry Ridge. Known globally as the Culture Coach, Garry is a best-selling author, an adjunct professor for the University of San Diego, and a fierce advocate for the idea that a leader's job isn't to be the smartest person in the room, but to help their people get an A. Today, we're breaking down his specific algorithm for culture, why he refused to lay anyone off during the Great Recession, and what every dumbass can learn about the art of leadership. Garry, welcome to the show.
G'day, Jeff. Yeah, well, I am the dean of dumbassery, so I'm pleased to be here.
The dean of dumbassery, and I remember you telling me that you used to introduce yourself as a brilliant, incompetent person, but together we can go far. That's left an indelible mark on me.
Well, I used to say I was consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right, and I needed all the help I could get.
You said it much better than me, your words. Well, Garry, let's jump in. You've spent over 3 decades with one of the most iconic brands in the world, WD-40. But your leadership philosophy seems rooted in a very simple, almost kind of academic idea that work should be a place where we learn and where we feel safe. So looking back at your early years in Australia, was there like kind of a specific mentor or even a bad leadership example that made you realize the traditional command and control model was broken?
Well, I think it was probably me. If I looked in the mirror, I was once upon a time the command and control leader. In fact, when I became CEO at WD-40 Company, I went back to school. I did a master's degree in leadership at the University of San Diego. And in the first class, we did the disc profile, and I was a Turbo D. And the definition of a Turbo D is be brief, be bright, and be gone. And it was kind of that taught me that wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go. And fortunately enough, I had some great mentors. The one at the top of the ladder was, of course, my dear friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard, who was my professor. And then we wrote a book together, and I was able to serve on the board of his company for 10 years. But as I coach now, what's really obvious to me is leaders need to look in the mirror. And I looked in the mirror, and I was probably the best example of my worst self.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, tell me, when you first stepped into the CEO role, how did that realization change your personal KPI kind of viewpoint or how you measured the success of people around you?
So I knew that we had an opportunity to take the blue and yellow can with the little red top to the world. And from a marketing platform, we knew how to do that. The thing that was on my mind was, how do we build a culture where if the sun never sets on the organization, people don't have to wait to do what I call quack up the hierarchy to make a decision. And I didn't know how to do that. And I was on a plane traveling from Los Angeles to Sydney, and as you do when you travel, you read. And I think I was 38,000 feet somewhere above the South Pacific Ocean at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I read a quote from the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama's quote was, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And I thought, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if we could do that in business? And then I read a quote from Aristotle, which was, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, oh, duh. Of course, if people really enjoy what they're doing, they're going to do great work. I still didn't know how to do it. And then fast forward, I got back and I read this article about this master's degree at USD, which was put together by Ken Blanchard and the university. And I went to an information session, and Ken was there, and he said, most MBA programs get people in the head. We've got to get people in the heart. That's where it is. And I thought, you know what? I'm going back to school. So I was 2 years into being the CEO of a US public company, and I went back to school. And for the next 2 years, I really learned the benefits of servant leadership, and fortunately was in a position to be able to execute them in the organization and watch the organization grow through this cultural change of, an organization where people know and feel like they belong, they know they matter, they're there to learn, and they're going to be coached, not managed.
Mm. I often find that that servant heartedness is almost intrinsically tied to something deeply rooted in leaders that was already there. But did you feel like this was kind of like a persuasion time of education where you were seeing that this was actually the way to drive profitable outcomes? Or was it kind of unlocking a deep desire maybe in your heart to really steward the lives of the people that were entrusted to you at the company?
Yeah, even though as a business leader back then I was a Turbo D, I think I've always had, a real love of people. I was the youngest of four. My mum lived till she was nearly 100 years old. My dad worked for the same company for 50 years. And growing up, I was, always involved in a people type, environment in Australia. And my mum taught me a lot of good lessons, and one of them was don't get too big for your boots. In Australia, that's a syndrome. They call it the tall poppy syndrome, and we were taught to treat people with respect and dignity, and say please and thank you, and I also read a book that really made a difference in my life. It was Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten by Robert Fulghum. And if you read that, the lessons in that are very clear. Say please and thank you, pick up after yourself, help someone cross the road, all of those things. So I guess it was hiding inside me. I never knew that I would have the opportunity to amplify it through further learning and then do it. And fast forward to today, I just when I refired from WD-40 company, I said I'd just completed my 25-year apprenticeship in leadership. Now I had to put it to work. And the reason I do what I do today is I absolutely believe that business has an opportunity to make a positive difference in the world, and we need to do something about this unhappy world that we're in right now. And I often say, or I used to say, imagine a place where you go to work every day. You make a contribution to something bigger than yourself. You learn something new. You're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and you go home happy. Happy people create happy families. Happy families create happy communities. Happy communities create a happy world. And golly, we need a happy world. So I do what I do now to help leaders understand that even a dumbass as a leader can make a difference in the world if they're dedicated to building cultures that are not toxic, but where people actually feel safe and go home happy.
I think it's incredible. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, we spend 90,000 hours of our lives working, and that's second to sleep, which is kind of a sobering fact. And I agree that business and the institution of businesses is so uniquely positioned to elevate human lives. In fact, less people are going to churches or other types of institutions to find meaning and connection and really explore the fullness of their humanity, of their agency that they have in the world. And so their validation often comes from their work outputs, their vocational lives, the people around them. And I think it's just so cool that someone that actually was in that seat for so long for such a reputable brand with that kind of market cap growth is now transitioning into the consulting world versus just starting with a perspective on it from the outside in and having never walked in those shoes. I think that's what makes you so unique in your consulting practice today. And are you finding that the clients you're serving as the culture coach today and the work that you're doing and the kind of work throughput you're putting out there now, is that kind of what they're seeing in you? Is that you've had that experience in the past and you can relate to what they're going through?
Yeah, I'm this much of an academic and this much, a big much of a practitioner. So I have plenty of scar tissue. And the truth being that when I talk to CEOs and leaders about having a high will of the people and a good strategy equals the outcome, and the challenge is actually building a high will of the people or a highly engaged workforce. And they tell me that it doesn't make a difference. I can call BS. I can say, you know what, you're saying it doesn't make a difference because you're not prepared to put the work into it. And a lot of leaders think, this culture thing is like fairy dust. You sprinkle it on an organization and it changes. It's not that at all. This is simple. It's not easy. And time is not your friend because a lot of leaders are under that pressure of give me a short term result now in 90 days, otherwise you're out, and that doesn't work. But I can tell you, and I can verify through fact that if you spend the time and you build the culture, you will build an organization that can sustain itself in bad times and excel in good times.
Well, that's exactly the type of resiliency we love to study on this show. And I think you're the right person to bring on to talk about this specifically. And I've seen that you have this algorithm for culture and the steward's decision to put this into practice. And I'm going to let you explain it. The way I understand it is values plus behavior times consistency is the key. But the fact of the matter is that it's really, really, really hard because it requires relentless repetition and discipline. So walk us through kind of your algorithm, the way you explain it to leaders, and how you encourage them to put it into practice.
Sure. So I stole the beginning of that, which was values, culture equals values plus behavior from Simon Sinek. He had it in his book, and I said to Simon, I agree with you. However, you've missed a magic word, and the magic word is consistency. So if you think about the foundations that need to be in place, do people know and feel like, and are they treated like they belong? Do people know that the work they do matters and makes a difference and they're being recognized for that? Are we as leaders dedicated to being learners and teachers? Do we have a set of values that protect people and set them free? And are we being coaches? And the coaching side is the behavioral side. So culture equals values. So we have those values, the ones I've shared, plus the ones that are unique to the organization, plus behavior. Behavior is the coaching side of it. And if we do that consistently, we will build an organization that have a highly dedicated group of people because they feel the result of all those things. And you will end up with an organization that people want to escape to instead of escaping from. And, during COVID, there was a lot of talk about the great resignation. I actually wrote an article about it. I called it wasn't the great resignation, it was the great escape. COVID gave people an off ramp to get out of those toxic cultures, and they could actually go and hide at home where they didn't have to go in and face this person every day. And this is Alec. This is Alec, or it could be Alice, the soul sucking CEO of Fear Incorporated.
Love that. Love that that model. And I'd love to double click on that consistency on kind of the flip side of it. So if the leader has the values and the behaviors but lacks the consistency, what happens to the safety of the tribe at that point?
It evaporates. So, many years ago, obviously, when I was a young lad in Australia, I went to Drummoyne Boys High School. It was a high school in the Sydney area. And my science teacher one day in the science lab gave us a petri dish. And the science teacher said, we're going to grow culture in this petri dish. And there are two things that are really important. Number one, what are the ingredients we want to put in this petri dish to grow the desired culture? And number two, what are you going to do as the owner of the petri dish to feed the good ingredients and attack the toxins? And what happens if you do not apply consistency to the algorithm, the toxins get into that cultural petri dish very quickly and destroy the culture. And it takes time to build a great culture. It takes a nanosecond for the toxins to get in if you don't treat them and start to erode that culture very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I love that. I want to talk about how stewardship is easy when the wind's at your back and you've had many long streaks of success and growth, but it's tested in the valleys. So during the 2008 Great Recession, you made a countercultural decision to refuse all layoffs, suggesting it was better for everyone to suffer a little than for a few to suffer a lot. I recall you saying. So, when you were standing before your board or your shareholders making that case, what was kind of the internal compass that told you that this was the only way forward at that time?
Well, our biggest asset was in the organization was our people. So if we were prepared to throw our most powerful, most influential, most important asset out, how is that going to actually help us survive into the future? There are other things we said we could do. So, sure, we got together as a tribe, as I called us in those times, and said, okay, we know that we've got to do certain things to protect our business. But the thing we have to protect the most is the most important asset, which is our people. So we did other things. We worked out you only needed one subscription to the Wall Street Journal. We worked out that, there were, and in fact, it was quite a cleansing time because we did something called the Stupid Policies Program during that period of time. And we went out to the organization and we said, tell us all of the stupid policies or practices we have in the organization that are not adding value. And the incentive of doing that is the benefit from that is going to ensure that we can keep all our people together. And our people went out and we found a bunch of stupid things that we were doing that we got rid of. So we didn't get rid of the most important things. We got rid of the stupid things.
I think every organization, whether it's in business or elsewhere, should go through a stupid policy review and do a cultural cleansing like that. By avoiding the brain drain during the recession and going through those stupid policy things, you actually had one of the best years in history shortly thereafter. And I think I've heard you call it building cultural equity. And so, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we did. The year after the 2008, 2009 so-called global recession, we had the best year in the company's history, and it was because we were ready to go. The other thing that we did in that time is we substantially turned up the volume on learning and teaching in the organization. We did more people development because I didn't want our people sitting on a bus stop getting weak. I wanted them to be going to the gymnasium getting stronger so that when we came out of this, and so we did. And not only that, we didn't have to refuel the tank. We didn't have to bring the brains back in. They were ready to go. But the other thing that was interesting when you talk about cultural equity was when we went through COVID. In March 20, when this all happened, we just completed our regular employee feedback loop and our numbers came back and they were as good as they'd ever been and probably a little better. And then COVID hit, and we had to go into this new style of leadership, which took away one of what I believe, continue to believe, and something that I'm worried about right now is the value of connection, because we all went out, virtually. But we found ways of staying connected. Now, I loved what our French team did. They used to have virtual cooking classes. So they'd all be in their kitchens doing virtual cooking classes amongst themselves. We brought comedians in virtually and did things globally. We had my dear friend Chester Elton came in and did a wonderful webinar with us on the power of love and belonging in the organization. So we were doing everything we could. And when we had the chance to sneak in and see each other, we did also. Of course, we were wearing masks.
Of course.
But anyhow, come January 2021, I said to our team, I said, I think we're okay, but I just want to go and check that we're not got a leak in the equity, the cultural equity tank that we're not seeing. So we went out and we did the survey, and the numbers came back, and it's what you referred to in the intro. The numbers came back, and they were all about where they were before COVID hit, which made me really happy. But there was one number that went up, and the number was the one that related to I feel safe and excited about my place in the company's future, and it went to 97%. And I said, that can't be right. We're in January 2021. we don't have an answer for COVID yet. How can people feel, happy and safe? And we went out and checked the number, and it was right. And when we went back to confirmed why, they said, I feel safe. There's no place I'd rather be right now than here because I'm cared about and I want to escape to it. And to me, and I get goosebumps even when I tell the story now, that was a mic drop moment for me because I said to, you know what, we've proven now that this works. If we can do this in this, this culture is solid as a rock. Um, it's probably the day I decided it was time to refire and retire. I mean, it was like, okay, I can't do anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that is a mic drop moment. And what do you think it fundamentally taught you about leadership? Because that was a time that obviously everybody was tested, and maybe to some degree we're all tired of talking about COVID and we want to move on. But to me, it was such a strong opportunity to see servant leadership or steward leadership in action and what it really meant to be one. That's actually when I started podcasting in 2020 because I wanted to capture what leaders were doing in this time of collective trauma. What did it really teach you as a business leader about the importance of, let's say, connection and being intentional about that and creating community within your four walls and how that leads to better business outcomes?
Well, it taught me through the example that what we were doing, was roughly right. The other thing that it taught me is do not make finite decisions in extremely uncertain times. You have to be flexible. You have to, and one of those that I refer to is when organizations say, "Oh, now we're going to be virtual forever."
Yeah.
And people made life-changing decisions. We didn't say that. We said we're not going to have a work from home policy. We had what we call a work from where policy. We are going to work from where we need to be when we need to be there. And right now, that means we need to work from not a place other than together in an office. But we may need to work from there again if that's where we need to work from. And I think a lot of companies paid a price for making finite decisions in really uncertain times. So I think that was one of my biggest learning moments. But I'm a huge advocate now for getting back together. I really and I do a lot of. I'm worried about this loneliness disease that's on out there right now.
Same.
You don't make connection just on a screen like you and I. I'm sure, we've talked a couple of times, but I'm sure we would know each other a lot better if we were sitting down over a coffee and just getting to know each other. And great ideas and innovation doesn't come off a screen. It comes off having the conversation, then meeting the person at the water cooler and say, "What do you think about that? I just thought about that." And "Oh, wait a minute, let's go for a walk and talk about that more. And tell me why you think that." Or, you're in a meeting and something goes off track and you get the chance to go down to the office and say, "Are you okay? I saw your reaction to that and I didn't want it to fester. I just love to know if you're okay now."
Yeah. I agree with that fully. And this is coming from somebody who I mean, I'm raising a family. I've got three young kids. I enjoy the opportunity to be really active in their lives and I enjoy the flexibility of working remotely. But I have found just through event production and working with our clients and capturing stories and moments that matter that level of proximity is so incredibly important. And I think that work from where is such an incredible way to phrase it too, because during that time, people were making promises and overcorrecting and that sends false signals that make these big RTO, return to office movements so difficult for the culture and so disruptive. But you were honest, you were transparent, you were intentional about the ways that you convene people virtually when you had no other choice. You had the classes, you had the connection. As you're kind of on your farewell tour years later, right? Like you've left WD-40, you still have all these connections. What are you now hearing from your former employees and colleagues about those types of decisions to keep your word when things got dark, to communicate with clarity, to be vulnerable, to be authentic as you are? What kind of feedback are you now hearing as you look back?
Well, I would hope and I believe that the culture lives on at WD-40 Company. I have I was fortunate enough to have a great successor that we picked, and my role was to get out of his way. I had my turn in the seat, so I have very little involvement actually with the company. I believe that they continue to exercise the importance. They talk about it a lot in their public disclosures. I read it on their social sites, so I've got to believe it lives on. I'd be very disappointed if it didn't, and they would be absolutely stupid if they did, because they know how powerful it is. So I think it's something that's, and I wanted to make sure that the culture was so strong that it would take intention to break it, and I think we achieved that, and so that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing you talked about was the fact that you knew that 97% of people felt safe. And the only way you would have done that is if you would have used some sort of a pulse survey to measure the emotional state of the company. And I know that you focus on the will of the people as a primary engine of the business. And I'd love for our chief stewards who listen that are running their businesses today to understand the importance of like getting the honest feedback, right? I mean, obviously you yearn for the 97% employee sentiment, but also like hearing what areas of correction you have. So how did you treat feedback and pulse surveys and kind of keeping a finger on the pulse of the will of the people as you made business decisions throughout your career?
You got to spend a lot of time in the stinky locker room. That's it. I mean, I spent probably 50% or more of my time getting my shoes dirty, walking the business, talking to the people, asking them the questions, and also creating an environment where it was safe. That's why we created the learning moment. As you know, we never made mistakes at WD-40 Company. We had millions of learning moments.
Mm,
And the learning moment, it was a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared with all people. So, we encourage people, hey, tell us what's really working, but tell us what's not working. The stupid policies program was a typical example of that. And then when we did our pulse surveys, and the results came back, I used to say, I can't do anything about these results. It's about the leaders in the field and in the offices and out there with our tribe. You have to make those changes. So if we got some areas of opportunity identified in certain departments or regions, we'd go out to them and say, okay, Jeff, you're the leader here. These are your results. So tell us what you're going to do about it, because it's not going to be human resources. They're not there to be the shepherds. You're there to lead the efforts. So you have to give. And by the way, we'll be back again soon to see how it's changed. So this consistency is so important. But again, I guess it's really creating that environment. And as you know, my latest book is called Any Dumbass Can Do It, and ASS in the book is not referring to anybody's bottom or posterior. It's really talking about a donkey. And I wanted to just take a moment to share why that's important. Donkeys get a bad rap. People think they're just stubborn or slow, but here's the truth. Donkeys are steady. They'll keep going long after others give up. They're loyal companions. You can count on them when the road gets tough. They do protect you. They are calm. They're very watchful and surprisingly brave when it matters. They're practical, not flashy. They know how to conserve energy and get the job done. And while they might not always rush into things, that caution often keeps them safe. So when I say any dumbass can do it, what I really mean is this. You don't have to be brilliant to be a great leader. You just have to have a bit of courage, a lot of care, and the humility to keep learning, because like the donkey, leadership isn't about showing off. It's about carrying the load, sticking with the journey, and most importantly, helping others get to where they need to go.
mm. That is an incredible point. I actually was a disciple in a reenactment of the entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday this past Sunday, and we had a donkey with us, and it was the calmest animal, so strong. I mean, there's a reason Jesus rode into the, into the gates on a donkey, and it was a biblical kind of fulfillment of the law and the prophecy. But I mean, just the animal itself is brilliant. And I think that in a world where leadership is viewed as kind of this thing where you need to be flashy, you need to have it all figured out. It's kind of why a lot of CEOs have the kind of the ivory tower type of syndrome where they get kind of lost and lonely because they have nowhere else to go. But what you said at the beginning of our conversation is how you introduce yourself as kind of a brilliantly incompetent. I can never say it as well as you did, but just the humility that you showed and the way you invited people into, working together and solving problems and continuing to carry the load and the weight of leading a large company and all of its people and human lives forward. So did that hit you kind of like as you retired and kind of moved into this next phase, or when did you realize this donkey analogy, this ass analogy was so important to you?
Well, when I was putting the book together and I thought of, I did a lot of thinking around a lot of it, and I thought, well, really, yeah, I mean, that's what it's about. And, we talked earlier about this guy, Alec, the soul-sucking CEO of Fear Incorporated. And, this person has attributes that you just described. Their ego eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They're corporate royalty. They think they're an entitled leader. They want a fear-based culture. They're a master of control. They're a know-it-all. They have all the answers, even the wrong ones. They don't value learning. They must always be right. They hate feedback and avoid accountability, and they're always blaming others, and they do not keep their commitments. But if you're a servant leader, as Blanchard would tell us, servant leaders love and involve their people. They're always in servant leadership mode. They're expected to be competent, and they love learning. They love the learning moments. They have a heart of gold, but they have a backbone of steel. They're champions of hope. They know micromanagement isn't scalable. They do what they say they're going to do, and they treasure the gift of feedback. That's the comparison against the two.
I think it's brilliant. And really, this show is all about interviewing chief stewards like yourself that are seasoned, that hold the essential blueprints for navigating the various seasons of scale while maintaining integrity and purpose required to build a business that truly lasts. I mean, the reality is a lot of the leadership, the mercenary leadership that you see out there that are leading capitalistic endeavors, I mean, they're fly by nights, they don't last. And these companies that are leading the market, are not the ones that are going to be around in the next, 5 years or however long, right? So we're seeing these long standing companies that are lasting decades, if not over 100 years. They're the ones that have this kind of leadership mentality that's built to last. And I believe that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, WD-40's been around for 75 years. And I was privileged enough to be part of it for, nearly 40 years. So,
Garry, if you're speaking directly to business owners today or the chief stewards that listen to this show, we've talked about a lot of great stories and insights that you've had. What is kind of the one thing that you think is really important for them to consider as they continue to lead their businesses towards 100-year legacies that last well beyond their lifetime?
it's not about you. It's about how you help others in the organization step into the best version of their personal self. It's not about you. It's about that. Be always the number one responsibility of a leader is to be a learner and a teacher. So, just continue learning, continue teaching, helping those you have the privilege to lead step into the best version of themselves. That's what it's about.
Well, Garry, thank you for having sat in the steward chair for so long, sitting in our steward chair today. It was such a gift to have you on the show. Wow. Thank you so much, Garry, for joining us today. I really feel like his journey proves that when you move from marking the paper to helping your people get an A, the results aren't just cultural, they really are exponential. And now here is your steward's call. As always, I think this is one key practice you can take from the conversation and put into practice. And for me, it was Garry's culture algorithm. This week, I want to focus on that multiplier of consistency. Values and behaviors literally are just words on a wall unless they are repeated consistently In the small moments, the way you handle a mistake, the way you start a meeting, or the way you protect your team like he did in a crisis. Ask yourself, is my leadership an umbrella that was built before the storm, or am I trying to patch the leaks while my people are already getting wet? Remember that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's the foundation you build for those who follow. So what you preserve today determines how clearly the next generation can lead tomorrow. If you found value in today's conversation, as always, we'd be so grateful if you would follow the Steward Chair wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us grow our influence and reach more leaders like you, and just share it with the leader you respect. A final thank you to our incredible team, Quentin and Thomas, our executive producers, and our managing editor, Daniel. They really are the true stewards behind this show, and I am deeply, deeply grateful for them. I'm your host and researcher, Jeff Bond, and with that, go and be a leader worth following.